The first reading is from Genesis 21, verses 8 to 21. A reading from Genesis. The child Isaac grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, but because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness at Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. This morning, we have our third story from the journey of Abram. And today, the focus shifts quite dramatically. We've been following Abraham and the covenant promises made to him by God. But today, we hear of Ishmael and the great nation that he will become. 2 weeks ago, at the beginning of June, we heard of Abraham receiving that promise of offspring and land for future generations. Abraham believed God would be faithful, and so he put his faith in God. But the next 25 years of his life would be lived in anticipation of seeing those promises fulfilled. We journeyed with Abraham as he prepared for what would come to be. Last Sunday, we turned our attention to Sarah, who laughed when she heard the visitor to their tent say that she would have borne a child by the following year. But at the age of 90, when Sarah thought this was impossible, by the following year she had become pregnant and given birth to Isaac, the name which means he laughs. Sarah's story helps us remember that laughter can be both a way we try to hide the pain we hold deeply, and also a way to celebrate that which is our greatest joy. And so today we move 2 or 3 years further as Isaac is weaned and a great feast is held. And Sarah at this party, at this festival, sees Isaac playing with Ishmael, the son of Hagar. When we come to these stories in little bits, week over week, or we glance at our Bible, sometimes we lose sense of the scale and the time frame. Isaac is now 2 to 3 years old. The children are weaned a little bit later than we would. in the ancient Near East culture. But Ishmael would be around 16 or 17 years old. So this isn't a story of two toddlers playing in the tent. This is the story of a teenager and a young child. They're half-brothers at a very different age. Ishmael is very much his own person, grown up and responsible. So when we hear that he and Isaac are playing and Sarah is distressed by this, there are a few possibilities. There's the jealousy, which has been mentioned earlier, which might be rising, that her slave Hagar bore a child before her, or Sarah may have witnessed Ishmael causing problems for Isaac, the potential for a brotherly feud that could lead to danger. One must only think back to Cain and Abel, or looking ahead to Jacob stealing Esau's blessing, to know that the rights of the firstborn can cause great familial conflict. But no matter the reason, Sarah asked Abraham to send Hagar and her son away. And Abraham, the father, is distressed by this request. But God tells him to listen to his wife. Abraham is reminded that the covenant promise of generations and land will come through Isaac. However, Hagar and Ishmael will be protected. And so Abraham provides the duo with supplies and sends them on their way into the desert of Beersheba. But eventually they run out of water. And knowing death is near, Hagar places a weakened Ishmael under a bush and sat a ways off, for she could not look upon the death of her child. And she lifted up her voice and she wept. 16 years ago, August 2010, you remember hearing in the news about a mine about 800 kilometers north of Santiago, Chile, where a cave-in occurred and trapped miners deep underground. Rescue efforts in the initial days were slowed by further collapses and the challenge of reaching areas that extended 800 meters underground. Rescuers dug exploratory holes over those next 2 weeks until on August 22nd, one of the probes picked up a tapping symbol. And when it was pulled up, there was a note attached. All 33 of us are all right in the shelter. For 17 days, no one in the world knew whether anyone down in that mine was alive. They only had emergency rations to last for 2 days. But once rescuers knew that there were survivors, the whole plan changed. American and Canadian companies sent in 3 different drills to help with the rescue, until finally on October 12th, the entire crew was raised to the surface in a special capsule that carried each man through the emergency tunnel. The note became a rallying cry for those who had come to help. The note delivered from the depths of the earth to the surface allowed the miners' voices to be heard. We heard when God responds to Hagar. God tells Hagar to reach out your hand and pick up your son. I wonder if, like those miners, it is like that hand when they emerge from the surface and the hand reaches out to bring them to safety. Genesis tells us that in that moment of desperation in the desert, God heard the voice of the boy. The hearing of Ishmael's voice becomes the turning point of the story. We talk of Abraham's faith, but as we just heard in our psalm, the words cry out, I am your faithful servant. Not just Abraham, but Hagar and Ishmael in the desert as well. And so God calls to Hagar and tells her, do not be afraid, for I have heard the boy. Lift up the boy, hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him. And then her eyes are opened and she saw a well of water. God hears the voice and shows what blessings are available. In that moment, we are reminded that God's promise is wider than we can imagine. Yes, the covenant promise will come through Isaac, but that does not mean that all the rest of the world or that Ishmael is cast aside. Ishmael will live and also father a great nation, a nation that will once again be brought into the story of salvation. For it's the nations descended from Ishmael from which the Magi come to worship the newborn Christ. And Paul's work in Arabia goes to the descendants of Ishmael, who are the first Gentiles to hear the gospel. God's plan of salvation is not to send people away for their loss, but only to work towards all nations being reached and brought in. Today is marked, as I mentioned, as National Indigenous Peoples Day, a time to reflect on daily practices and actions which work toward truth, healing, and reconciliation. It's a day to be reminded of common humanity and how for generations that commonality was forgotten and dismissed. I think we might reflect on the story of Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, and Ishmael, might teach us about past pain and future healing. Where have relationships been broken where settlers in Canada cast Indigenous treaty partners away? Where have people starved in the wilderness fearing for their future? Where is there an opportunity for us to raise our voices, to extend our need for reconciliation to God? Where is there a reminder that God will look after all who have been created? That our identity is found in our relationship to the Creator? The journey of reconciliation and the rescue of the Chilean miners both offer us reminders of how our journey towards fullness of life and relationship is one that feels slow. When the miners first heard that drill coming to them, they would have been overjoyed, but also knew that a long journey still remained. It would be nearly 2 months before they would step foot above ground. But the supplies that came down to them and the messages they sent up were like gifts of God descending, wells of water appearing in the wilderness, and their notes going up like the voice of Ishmael crying out for their needs. God hears our cries, hears our voices. So let us not be afraid of making those voices loud. Let us pray unceasingly. Let us sing with gusto. Let us work toward knowing our neighbors more deeply because God first knows us. We belong to the Creator as does each person who is on their own journey, one in which God provides the wellspring of life, the living water of Christ.